Our Earth and its closest neighbour, the Moon, have been involved in a romantic relationship since the beginning of time. It creates the perfect ambience for romantic dinners, late-night walks, and other nighttime activities. To add to that, this satellite is crucially important to the cycle of life on Earth. But just how important is it? What would happen if the Moon was suddenly destroyed? Could it lead to the extinction of humans? Let's find out. Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin landing on the Moon on June 20, 1969 is perhaps humanity's biggest achievement in space, and to date it remains the only foreign celestial body that humanity has landed on. At 238,855 miles away, it is our closest companion in the vast world of space. But at the same time, it is also one of the most neglected celestial elements. Compared to rogue elements like asteroids, comets, and even our own Sun, which provides natural light for humans, the Moon is quite gentle. However, it is just as important as any space object you can think of. According to the most recent calculation, the Moon is estimated to be around 4.4 billion years old. On average, it measures around 2,159 miles. According to scientists, the Moon is the second brightest thing in our solar system after the Sun. Also, the Moon is said to be about 14,000 times brighter than Venus, which is the next brightest thing in the night sky. The Moon is the fifth largest satellite in our solar system. Crucially, the existence of the Moon in its rightful orbit helps to regulate the seasons we experience on Earth and many other things like stabilizing our orbit over hundreds of thousands of years. Normally, our Earth is tilted around 23.5 degrees, and it is able to maintain this orbit due to the gravitational pull of the Moon. This causes the Earth to drift further by around 1.5 inches every year, ultimately increasing the length of our day by around 2 milliseconds every century. Furthermore, the gravitational pull of the Moon slows down the rotation of the Earth. Many decades earlier, the Moon was much closer to Earth. According to scientific estimates, the Moon was orbiting Earth at around 14,000 miles as compared to the current orbiting distance of 250,000 miles. Back then, the Moon appeared 20 times bigger than it does now. Additionally, these processes ensured that the Earth had 4-hour rotations, which are about 6 times faster than the 24-hour rotation that we experience today. This is caused by the rotation of the Earth, which causes the tidal bulge to sit slightly ahead of the Moon. As a result, a small amount of energy is fed to the Moon, feeding a small amount of energy to the satellite and pushing it into a higher orbit. These tidal interactions between the Earth and the Moon slow down the rotation of the Earth and expand the orbit of the Moon. All of these effects balance out to conserve angular momentum. The Moon's biggest influence on our Earth is on ocean tides, and once the Moon disappears, everything in the ocean and along the coast will be affected. For humans, the change will happen gradually. Without the Moon, the Earth's tilt is bound to change rapidly from anywhere between 0 degrees and 45 degrees. Consequently, the Earth's rotation will be altered, and the traditional maritime ecosystem will be dramatically changed. A 0-degree tilt would most likely result in no seasons, and a more significant slope would result in extreme weather changes and could possibly send us back to the Ice Age. Similar to the Moon, the Sun also has some influence on the Earth's ecosystem. However, the Moon's influence is significantly greater, despite only reflecting between 3 and 12% of the sunlight that hits it. For instance, without the Sun, the Earth's temperature will be greatly reduced, which most likely will freeze the oceans around the surface. But critically, a change to the Moon's orbit will radically change the tides. Normally, as the Earth spins around its axis every day, the gravitational pull of the Moon drags the water on the nearest side of the Earth towards it, which leads to the creation of a bulge. At the same time, the sea swells up on the other side because of the rotational force generated by the Earth's spin. This process is responsible for causing the 2 high and low tides that we experience daily on Earth. If you take the Moon out of the equation, the tides may or may not happen, depending on a number of other factors. But if they do, they'd be a lot simpler and weaker, about 50% to 75% less than what we currently experience. For sea-based and nocturnal animals like moths, turtles, Californian grunion fish, mussels, snails and crabs, the impact of a moonless world will hit them almost instantaneously, and perhaps even worse than it would to humans. Generally, thousands of silvery grunions crawl to the shores to mate between March and August. This mating ritual is linked to and regulated directly by the tides. Light is possibly, maybe just after the availability of the food, the most important environmental driver of changes in behaviour and physiology, David Dominoni, an ecologist at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, told Science News for students. Aside from this, a moonless world will be remarkably confusing for these animals. Their sleep and hunting cycles will be distorted, and some of them risk extinction. That's certainly good news for rodents and other animals that are at the bottom of the food chain. Describing the effects of a moonless Earth, Paul Sutter, an astrophysicist at the Flatiron Institute, said, "Everything we know about the seasons will be completely out of whack. Some places on the planet would hardly ever see the sun at all, and at others, the sun would be overhead for months on end. Generally, all of our farming activities depend on seasons and climates. Upsetting the moon's natural orbit will disrupt our ability to grow and produce food. Other fun activities like surfing would also be disrupted. But is a moonless world really possible? Well, except for an extreme disaster in space, the moon is sure to remain in its rightful place for a long time to come. But ironically, even the slightest change in the moon's orbit could be disastrous for humans. And this is something that happens quite often, at least once every 18.5 years. This phenomenon, known as the moon's wobbly orbit, happens when the moon's orbit shifts between a maximum and minimum of plus or minus 5 degrees in relation to the Earth's equator. One of these wobbles could cause high tide floods with devastating circumstances, similar to those experienced after a major natural disaster like a tsunami or a typhoon. Several industries and infrastructures will be affected as well, from agriculture to technology to tourism, etc. According to NASA scientists, this phenomenon could happen sometime within the next decade. Expectedly, the leader of NASA's Sea Level Change Science team, Benjamin Hamilton, has taken a special interest in this issue and is currently studying the impact it could have on our planet and how we can possibly mitigate the risk. High tide flooding affects life very broadly in coastal communities. It impacts your ability to get on with your job and makes it difficult for businesses to stay open, Hamilton said. Now it's an inconvenience, but it's going to become hard to ignore, hard to live with. Based on NASA's prediction, the world is bound to experience 4 times the amount of flooding from one decade to the next, which would affect the most vulnerable regions and result in huge financial losses. Unfortunately, there isn't much we can do about it because the moon's wobbling orbit is a phenomenon that we can't control. The best we can do is to put measures in place to control the after effects and mitigate the risk. This would at least give us some leverage, at least in the short term. But in any case, the undeniable fact remains that our world would be a much different place without the moon.